Rainbow Six is the only ongoing game series that bears the name Tom Clancy that's actually based on a novel written by the man himself. From the first Clancy game, an experimental multimedia project connected to the novel SSN, to its continuation over 10 years after the author's death, the game's connections to the novels have become increasingly tenuous, but Rainbow Six has remained. That doesn't mean the series hasn't changed. With nearly endless iterations from its beginning as a tense strategic shooter to its current state in the ongoing siege, Rainbow Six's longevity is due in part to its ability to reinvent itself. This is the story of one iteration that never saw the light of day, its controversial marketing campaign in a shifting political landscape, and its eventual reworking into Siege. This is Rainbow Six Patriots. By 2011, Call of Duty was king. Military shooters had become the name of the game, and in the wake of modern warfare, Call of Duty had reshaped the generation into its image, forcing the old guard of the genre to adapt or die. In the 3 years since Vegas 2, Battlefield had made the successful jump to consoles, and Black Ops had managed to outsell every Rainbow Six game combined. In that time, the team at Ubisoft Montreal had kicked around a variety of ideas on how to reevaluate the IP for the modern market, with one idea focused on a robotic threat that felt further in the future than even the newest Ghost Recons, and another focused on turn-based strategy. What they decided on, however, was to return to the roots of the Clancy novels with real characters and real-world stakes. Over the last generation, partially as a result of the mainstream success of the Splinter Cell series, the Tom Clancy franchise had its meticulous edges shaved off, sacrificing permadeath and adding things like regenerating health to fit more in line with the trends of the time. Having said that, there was still a precision that lent a sense of authenticity, still managing to impress your friend's dad who remembers Ding Chavez from the novels, and confuse an 11-year-old who had bought a used copy of Vegas 1 at GameStop on a whim and would be making a video about Patriots a decade and a half or so later. However, they were never as loud, as fast, or as Hollywood as this new generation of shooters. In their golden age, that's what made them special, but now it was a bit of a problem. Put simply, people remembered the gameplay, but rarely remembered the stories. An odd situation, considering its connection to a prolific author. In June, however, just 14 days after E3, Kotaku would get a leak about a future title from Rainbow Six, and in order to protect their announcement, Ubisoft would decide to show off Patriots to the public early.
Hi, I'm David Sears, Creative Director for Rainbow Six Patriots here at Ubisoft Montreal. We have reason to believe someone may leak our preliminary target gameplay footage for Rainbow Six Patriots. So, we're taking the initiative and we're going to show you the target gameplay footage in its entirety here today. I hope you enjoy the viewing.
With a several-minute-long trailer taking a look at target gameplay from a few years prior, and a cover story with Game Informer a few months later, what we got was a thorough, if not early in development look at where the developers' heads were at. While there would still be the trademark tactical-style missions, they would be broken up by multiple perspective story segments inspired by Heavy Rain.
Jason!
These segments would follow a variety of different players in the story, grounded in real-world post-recession anxieties, and taking heavy influence from the rise of domestic paramilitary organizations over the past few years. Put plainly, Rainbow Six Patriots wanted you to not just play as members of Rainbow, but also as members of the terrorist organization, the True Patriots. Creative director David Sears was adamant that this wasn't just for shock value, pointing directly at the Call of Duty level No Russian as the opposite of what they were going for. Instead, wanting to start real conversations not just about why these types of organizations exist, but also the tough decisions groups like Rainbow are forced to make as a result of a homegrown threat like this.
If you continue to do a game with the same enemies, and you just sort of ignore things that are changing in the world, it just starts feeling fake. It feels like this is just a video game.
This is really rooted in the Clancy novels first and foremost. Part of the reason those books were as successful as they were was because they felt real world, rooted in the anxieties and strategies of the time. The world had changed, but that commitment to authenticity remained, with enemies now indistinguishable from average citizens and on American soil. Players would now be forced to make real tough decisions, live with the consequences, and butt heads with other squad leaders about if and how much Rainbow should stoop to the true Patriots' level. It's all trying to feel a little morally gray, with Rainbow being heroes, but also being unstoppable G-men gunning down people who appear to be civilians in the streets, and the true Patriots feeling less like these cartoonish inhuman monsters. Sears as well draws direct influence from newer Clancy books such as Teeth of the Tiger and Dead or Alive, pointing to their focus on the campus, a more Black Ops, less on the books version of Tactical Squad seen before. It's fantastical and frankly less fun, but still maintains that trademark Clancy faux authenticity. We can see the sensationalist headline now, Matt Burtz writes in the Game Informer cover story. Liberal game publisher paints Tea Party as terrorists. The developers of Rainbow Six Patriots were prepared to go on Fox News to defend their work. It was intended to have conversations, and in 2011, a lot of people outside of games saw them as not actually deserving those conversations at best and corrupting society at worst. Over the last few years alone, the aforementioned No Russian level had caused mainstream controversy for allowing players to participate in a terrorist attack, Medal of Honor had faced criticism for making the Taliban a playable faction in multiplayer, and most prominently, new outrage was found around video game violence in the wake of almost every mass shooting event in America, Sandy Hook especially. Rainbow Six Patriots was destined to have a similar treatment by media outlets, and it wouldn't take the release for that to happen. Though not from Fox News as expected. In June of 2013, in the wake of E3, Infowars.com would write an article about a new game that, quote, cast Tea Party and Patriot groups as enemy terrorists. The article, written by Adon Salazar, is, frankly, barely worth the time of day, full of strawman arguments against Ubisoft, and a blatant unwillingness to admit the existence of any right-wing extremist groups at the time, instead saying that the enemies and Patriots were just part of a, quote, ongoing campaign to demonize those seeking to uphold the principles of the Founding Fathers as terrorists. It's a not sound argument from a not sound air quotes news organization, especially considering the original Game Informer article that's referred to so heavily here directly cites a source on the exponential growth in domestic paramilitary organizations in the US. But of course, articles like this generate clicks. It's worth pointing out that Salazar is mentioned heavily in the lawsuits against Alex Jones in 2022 regarding Jones's claim that Sandy Hook was a hoax. Salazar would publish one of the first articles on the site about the conspiracy theory, which directly led to a single-day 500% increase in revenue and the targeted harassment of victims and their families. To be blunt, Salazar is a worthless piece of shit who profited from this type of bad faith argument. What's more, less than a year prior, one of these organizations that Salazar refuses to acknowledge the existence of would use the Game Informer article's opening paragraphs as a recruitment tool. According to prosecution, the leader of Fear would show prospective members the opening of the article as a seemingly benign way to ensure they agreed on the sorry state of the US. Their plans included everything from the poisoning of crops, seizing control of Fort Stewart, and assassinating prominent federal and state-level political figures, up to and including then-President Barack Obama, but were stopped after a prospective member and his wife were murdered, trying to turn the organization over to authorities.
How does that make you feel?
I don't know. I mean, it's surreal, I think is the
Did
word.
you lose sleep over it? Was it traumatic when that came out?
I don't know if it was traumatic to me. It really, you think a lot about it. And, I don't think I wrote anything that was
go kill people.
Yeah, it wasn't a manifesto by any stretch of the imagination. I was setting up the political context for someone making a game like Rainbow Six Patriots.
Right.
Besides the potential controversy, there was another major red flag in all of this. Ubisoft Montreal early on made the switch from Unreal to Anvil, their own internal engine developed for Assassin's Creed. This was a bit of a trend around this time, most famously with EA's push towards using DICE's Frostbite, even if their studios weren't making anything close to what it was designed for. Ubisoft Montreal, even this early on, had the opposite problem. Anvil was not designed with either first-person shooters or Heavy Rain-inspired narrative sequences in mind. What's interesting is that a few months prior at E3, Ubisoft had shown off Far Cry 3, another first-person shooter with its own proprietary engine, Dunia. Both engines would be used heavily going into the next generation and beyond. Anvil would remain primarily for Ubisoft's third-person open worlds, such as the Assassin's Creed series and the newer Ghost Recons, with the only two exceptions being Rainbow Six Siege and Extraction. I'm not a game developer, and I'm especially not one making decisions at Ubisoft in 2011, but with Patriots' already obvious Far Cry 3 influence, it just seems like an odd choice. It's worth pointing out, though, that Far Cry at this point only had co-op, while Assassin's Creed had been using a version of Anvil to have non-traditional PvP multiplayer since Brotherhood about a year before. Some internal infrastructure for PvP in the engine was likely already in place. It's apparent, looking at the Game Informer article and interviews at the time, that the multiplayer was a big selling point for Patriots. Vegas was, after all, the first 360 game to join the MLG circuit, and Rainbow Six games before this would frequently top multiplayer charts before Call of Duty's dominance. One thing that they wanted to do was minimize the use of menus in multiplayer, instead having an immersive lobby as the player's headquarters, with maps of upcoming levels to create plans and armories for loadouts. In 2011 or so, this was a fairly innovative idea, trying to keep players in the world as much as possible and avoiding staring at a bunch of menus to jump into games. Nowadays, however, almost every Ubisoft Live game has this in some shape or form, from the headquarters in the Division to Skull and Bones' on-land segments and about everything else in between. Hearing about it in the Game Informer cover story, it makes Patriots feel right on the cusp of the new generation's larger live service games, as this style of lobby was, as far as I can tell, mostly popularized by Destiny's Tower. Patriots' choice to make multiplayer fully siloed into a separate mode, however, was more in line with the trends of the Xbox 360 generation, rather than being a fully live service game like The Division that could be played solo. It's interesting seeing basically what would become the standard at Ubisoft in its infancy, and arguably in a less cynical feeling form. Again, it goes back to the Clancy-esque feeling of authenticity, having a real game solution to what is often essentially a series of spreadsheets. It's a shame that a more corporate and homogenized Ubisoft has turned it into just another part of their far too big open worlds instead. After the initial cover story, it didn't take long for everything to blow apart at Ubisoft Montreal. In less than 4 months, basically all of its leadership, including David Sears and everyone else interviewed for the article, would depart the project. According to narrative director Richard Rouse, speaking to Game Informer years later, the warning signs weren't obvious, but the market was shifting to accommodate those more live service elements, next-gen consoles were just over the horizon, and investing so much into a 10-hour campaign that players would only play through once was becoming a tougher and tougher sell. On top of that, the team were hard at work on a potential E3 demo. However, due to problems once again with Anvil, that would fall through. Despite a new creative director being announced after the departure of Sears, 3 other directors would get their hands on the project in the following years, including Far Cry 3, Far Cry 5, and Watch Dogs Legion's director Jean-Sébastien Decon. Ubisoft, nearly a year after announcement in November, would state that the project was still in development, and was now likely targeting next-gen hardware. They would remain adamant that the project was in some form of development for almost all of 2013, despite pre-orders being cancelled in May and having nothing new to show off at E3 beyond stating that it had fully made the transition to next-gen. In December, 2 years after announcement, Ubisoft higher-up Laurent Detoc would confirm that the project hadn't ever been up to snuff with their internal focus groups and had all but been remade. Though even from him, confidence doesn't seem high, with the release being referred to as, quote, if and when, and it being unclear if whatever the team comes up with would resemble what was seen in the cover story at all. It was now the end of the expected release year, and in that time, Patriots had seen only its announcement, a small handful of controversies, and no real gameplay. In June, with the announcement of Siege at E3 2014, Ubisoft confirmed that Patriots was cancelled for good. This new project was built from the team and ashes of Patriots and had been worked on for a little over a year before announcement. Internally, the project had been half-jokingly referred to as Rainbow Six Unbreakable, a reference to not only Siege's destructible environments, but also Patriots' long time spent in development hell, unable to break through to the surface. Around announcement, the team would mention that single-player content for Siege was in development. However, beyond some PvE situations that have since been removed, this would never come to light. To speculate on Patriots' final days, it's clear Ubisoft was unsure where Rainbow Six's place was in the market, Put simply, you don't run through 5 creative directors in a year without management being the real problem. The other series under the Clancy umbrella had struggled with their own identity as well, with Splinter Cell Double Agent and Conviction as well as Ghost Recon Future Soldier all trying to appeal to a wider audience and losing what made their earlier entries great in the process. These games had also focused heavily on linear single-player experiences, and even a cursory look at Ubisoft Montreal's releases going into the next generation would show that this wasn't the trend anymore. It was far too expensive for so little playtime in their eyes. While Rainbow Six was facing development challenges, its sister series Ghost Recon had begun working on a new iteration focused on those big open worlds Ubisoft was becoming synonymous with, while still having gameplay that somewhat resembled its predecessors. With Siege and a new franchise in the Division shown off at E3 2013, the world of Clancy was now a strong contender in the live service market. Patriots, on the other hand, was far too focused on single player, with its mechanics and core gameplay ideas in service of it, rather than to the multiplayer. For what it's worth, and despite the rocky launch, Siege has never seen any traditional campaign resembling Patriots, or even to the level of previous entries, and it is at time of writing rapidly approaching its 9th year with solid player numbers. Due in large part to Patriots being a revolving door at Ubisoft and its general state of development hell for so long, the ideas seen in its original announcement have sort of bled into other projects beyond just Siege. Most obviously, Ghost Recon Wildlands features DLC missions with Team Rainbow, and a direct reference to the Patriots mission.
Hey, I heard something about an op you guys ran that went south. Operation Patriots, ring any bells?
Who told you about that?
I have my sources.
Tell your sources to mind their business. Patriots is very classified.
So you won't tell me what happened?
Not even with a knife to my throat.
It's really just an Easter egg, and the whole thing is more of a tie-in to Siege than anything. To me, there's something about having Rainbow and Bolivia doing the top-secret US military operations in South America trope that feels antithetical to the whole idea of Patriots, but it is nice to see the Clancyverse united in this way. On the other hand is the Division series as a whole, which does feature the on-home turf setting. And while the Division is one of my favorite Clancy's of the era, and I would go out on a limb and say it's one of the best versions of a looter-shooter type game, it's again not really trying what Patriots was. There's very little gray morality, and even less intention to create meaningful conversations about an anti-terrorist group on home soil gunning down people fairly indistinguishable from civilians in the streets of New York and Washington, D.C. Even if factions like the True Sons in the second game feel incredibly similar to the True Patriots with the edges filed off. It's also an interesting counterpoint to Watch Dogs Legion and its anyone can be a member of DedSec approach to gameplay, letting players recruit and control almost any NPC in the world to fight an invading and, notice where I put emphasis here, private military corporation named Albion. This may come across as over-embellishing the importance of one cancelled game based loosely on a dead Cold War era novelist's ideas, but it feels like in the wake of Patriots, Ubisoft has been a little less daring. These illusions of grounded real-world stories are mostly just a cheap facade that chips and reveals the one game they make these days. But it's hard to judge if Patriots is the cause or the victim of that mentality. At the end of the day, I'm not sure I want or am interested in a multi-billion-dollar company like Ubisoft tackling real-world issues like these after it's been market-tested, board-approved, and designed to sell a couple million copies. But it's still an interesting trend. Rainbow Six Patriots feels like a product of its time, a point where shooters, the Clancy franchise, and the live service model were all fluctuating underneath it. Right at the end of a time where good single-player ideas were enough to sustain a whole game. And so part of me wishes some version of Patriots released. But now today, it feels almost like a guiding hand to not just Clancy games going forward, but also Ubisoft as a whole, in a way that feels ironically similar to Tom Clancy himself.